Hey there, everybody. Hello. Good evening. This is your captain speaking. Now, this is coming from the should be up on the big screen now. There's a few people on. There's a few people waiting, and I will admit them all in. I'm just curious. Hey, Jesse, I'm just curious why my phone is trying to get on, or my phone is on. I don't know how that happened. I'm here.
You're here?
It says Marex. That's my phone.
Are you sure you're here?
I don't know. Now I'm confused. But I don't understand why my phone is joined on without video, by the way. Without video, my phone is on. And that's a weird phenomenon. I see it right here. This is my phone. What? Is someone impersonating me? No, this is my phone because this is the name of my phone.
And you have your phone with you?
Yeah. It's right here. Oh, you know what? Yeah, but I didn't dial it up.
My brain said,
No, that's really weird.
Elon Musk, he put
How did that happen?
he implanted, a chip in my brain. I said,
And you already got the chip, huh?
Yeah.
You were an early adopter of the chip. You still don't have a Tesla, but you got a chip.
I got a chip.
You skipped right ahead to Elon's chip. Gosh, that's aggressive, Mike. That's aggressive. That's like going right from the it's like going right to a iPhone.
Oh, you had to talk to you and so what wrong? What do you think about the Dodgers signing off these people, idiots?
What do I think the Dodgers think? Clearly, Mike doesn't like it. Mike just called them idiots. What? You called them idiots. I think the Dodgers have done something amazing, which is they're trying to
Like the Yankees.
well, I look, there's some of the people were definitely people that the Yankees were going after. But I think what's interesting about it is that, look, you and I talked about it. You even said it when we talked about why the Dodgers didn't go after any free agents the year before. You said it. We said other people said it. It's because they were going after Ohtani.
They had to go after Ohtani, because if they didn't, either the Padres or the Giants would have happened.
Yes, and I think it's a natural fit because we have a large Asian community in
Yeah,
our
we do.
community, and
He speaks English.
does he?
Yeah, when
He speaks English now, according to Mike.
When he went up and took his MVP award, he actually. did
Oh, he
that
said
with
stuff in
her.
English? I didn't notice him. Well, there you go. We have another guy, Yamamoto, that I don't know what his level of English proficiency is. Doesn't matter, as long as they can pitch, do their jobs, earn their money. And the great thing about obviously about what Ohtani did is he deferred all his money, which is unbelievable. Everybody said it like it was good for him, whatever. He didn't have to do it that much.
Yeah.
He definitely helped out his team, so I like that. Joyce, how are you feeling tonight?
I'm feeling much better. Thank you. I'm doing very well and happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, our friends, the Stolmans are who sometimes drive you. They're out of town, or at least John is. He's up in
John
Seattle.
is, and Glory is going to try to join us with Zoom if she can finish what she's doing.
I'm
Yeah.
here.
Oh, you're here.
he's there.
See,
There
she
you
is.
did finish.
She's there under iPhone. She's an
Yeah,
iPhone.
because I could not log on to my iPad for some reason. I'm going to still attempt because my phone is so miniature I can't see.
Well, that's not good. But we I was wondering. I heard coughing and there was nobody.
That's me.
No. Somebody was ventriloquy. There was coughing and I didn't know where it was coming from. It was a little scary for a second. I thought it was coming from the sky. God was coughing. I'm glad to hear God. I just don't want to hear God coughing. That's a little scary.
Right.
If God's not well, then you got to start worrying. But no, it's Sheldon in the from the restroom zone. Yeah, but we had Tu B'Shvat last week. I went to an amazing Tu B'Shvat breakfast that the JNF threw in the Phoenix area. It was up at the Desert Princess, and they had 1,000 people for breakfast. And they had a speaker talking about, she's a college professor speaking specifically about what's going on the college campuses and what's going on in our world right now with regards to the anti-Israel rhetoric,
What
anti-Semitic
is going
rhetoric.
on?
Her name is Rachel Fish, by the way. If you have a chance to read things that she writes or see her stuff, she's very, very well-spoken and is a very good speaker. But it was wonderful just to have that many people. I don't think anything new other than what she said and what a lot of people have said is at least now we have this issue has been brought into focus and that people are starting to pay attention to it, and hopefully they won't stop pay attention to it. As I mentioned it during the course of that day, that morning, it was a very short program, but when she spoke, she was, as I said, she was very eloquent. And one of the things that she had was a sticker on herself, which now I have too, which is, this says 117. Last week when I met her, she was wearing 111. So this is what we're wearing now, which is how many days the Israelis have been held hostage. So every day, put it on a new number and make sure that people see it and remember that this has been going on for 117 days now. We have kids that are being held in hostage and not knowing whether they're going to live or die. So that's something I picked up from there. I hadn't really thought of I hadn't thought about something so simple as just doing that. So all it was literally taking a sticker from the, a mailing shipping label and putting it on. Doesn't have to be fancy, and hopefully I don't have to wear it for much longer, but I'm going to wear it until they have been rescued or freed. Anyways, so I mentioned it yesterday when we had our class. It's definitely a Jewish tradition to use things to get people's attention and make people talk. But yeah, there's nothing, I don't think anything has been new in the last few days. Since we gathered last week, I don't think there's anything fundamentally different, unfortunately. Other than it looks like America's finally going to have to respond in some way to Iran. So we'll see. We'll see.
Or not.
Or not. Yeah.
It doesn't look like he's doing anything.
Well, I look, I don't know, but I tell you one thing: you don't want to give away too much until you there's no reason to tell people what you're going to do. You do it, and hopefully it'll be done. But definitely don't want to telegraph what your punch. So hopefully it'll be significant. I don't know. Anyways, last week the week before we were introduced to Rabbi Hillel and Shammai, and last week we continued with Rabbi Hillel's family sayings. We read Rabban Gamliel, we read Shimon ben Gamliel, again, the last Shimon ben Gamliel, but we had a lot of Shimons, a lot of Gamliels, and we actually do have a second Hillel, but we also had this guy, Rabbi Judah Hanasi, the guy who edited the Mishnah, the one who was Hillel's descendant, who lived around 200, who was the editor of the Mishnah, who took it upon himself and his time as the head of the Jewish community of Israel, to say, this is the Mishnah, this is our collection of oral tradition, of oral study, of oral Torah, and we're going to publish it, we're going to promulgate it, we're going to write it down, which means it's not oral anymore, but we still call it Torah Shebaal Peh, that it's oral Torah, but now it's been written, and now we have to deal with the fact that it is written. And then, of course, we have the Gemara, the rest of the Talmud that was completed in the next 300 to 400 years, also written down. Yeah.
It must have not, it must have a few rabbis say that came up, the idea that it's over, it's, the mission.
Yeah. Look, from what we know, people were writing stuff down before. But the idea of actually writing it and then, or assembling it,
Right.
editing it, putting the pieces together was a massive undertaking. It was also, again, more importantly, not just a difficult undertaking because of the material. And we know that some of the material didn't get in. There are,
100 years of material.
yes. And we're talking too about material that, yeah, not only reflected different historical periods, pre-Roman, post-Roman, from the political standpoint, but also before the temple and then after the temple was destroyed, right? A whole new reality, a time when Israel was the center of Jewish life and really kind of the focal point, and then a time when Israel, much of the Jewish community was exiled, where the institutions were destroyed, and people are calling into question, what is the Jewish demographic and what is the Jewish polity going to look like now that the temple is destroyed and now that there's no center that can hold everything together. So yeah, it was a massive undertaking. And again, more importantly, philosophically, or maybe again, even theologically, does God want this stuff written down? It changes the nature of what Jewish law had been, because you have the Torah and you have the teachings of the rabbis, but to actually be able to say, well, that's the teaching, it's been written down. They knew that this was something that was a game changer. It was a game changer.
Still in ancient Hebrew?
Well,
Language?
again, in the land of Israel, much of the language on the daily basis was in Aramaic.
Okay.
Some Greek, from at least some of the rabbis spoke Greek. But the Mishnah was not written in Aramaic. The Talmud was, the Gemaras were, but not the Mishnah. The Mishnah was written in Hebrew, which makes it a little bit easier to read, like for me and for other people who study Hebrew, specifically like biblical Hebrew, it's a little bit easier to follow. Because
Have you found any of the old texts from
the Mishnah, no, we haven't found texts that were written by the rabbis that survived.
Yeah.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are older, so it's not like they couldn't. So it's a fair question, like where are they? But the reality is that, interestingly, the Dead Sea Scrolls survived because they were put in jars. Somebody thought they would come back and get them, and those people were all killed, and they were left alone for 2,000 years. They weren't opened. The rabbinic texts essentially constantly were read and studied, and people, wore them down, and they didn't survive. They didn't survive for 2,000 years because they were actually being used. And so the oldest rabbinic texts that we have that are like, we know that this rabbi wrote it, and, they're from like the 5th, 6th century. Some of those texts survived only almost by accident, though, almost by like, okay, they were in a geniza and they survived because they were buried and like stuff was on top of them. But it's not like here's a book that the rabbis wrote that we have because they put it in a book, in a case, and somebody used it. No, we just don't have that, because those things would have probably been just worn down. They would have been buried. And the ones that we did find were buried because they were not in great condition, couldn't be used anymore. But we found them, and we have them, but they're not profound. They're not different, and they're not profoundly like, they don't help us understand the text anymore. And again, we're really like, I won't say they're garbage, but they were. I mean, they were put away because they couldn't be used anymore. And were put there because they were holy texts and people didn't want to throw them away. But that they were found as holy garbage, essentially. So we don't have any really, really old scrolls like that. Because again, if the scroll was used, it was just going to be used and used and used and then buried when it was done. Correct. But they're saved because somebody put them away and say, we're not going to use it anymore. That Torah we have shouldn't be used anymore. We have it because it's probably people have said it's perhaps 700 or 800 years old, but it's not supposed to be used anymore. It was a Geniza level of damage to it where it
Is
should
that
have been
what we
buried.
got? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we got it because it's not really supposed to be used. I mean, like, nobody would have said, hey, let's use this. They were like, let's put this away. Let's retire this one. And that's how we got it. So, so these guys, the Hillel's family, is important because they were the leaders, both dynastically and also, again, seems like they had a very good run of providing leadership. Judah Hanasi, Hillel's great grandson, is well regarded enough that the Romans trust him. He seems to have had a good relationship, at least according to the Midrash and some of those stories that we have about him. Some of them are legendary, that he was close with the Roman emperor, that he was close with the Roman leadership, and he was wealthy. Some of the stories about him seem to paint a picture of a guy, Judah Hanasi, is a little out of touch in the sense that he's a little bit wealthier and a little bit more elite than maybe the people who live in the country. But that's kind of, it's kind of where we are. And we finished with Rabban Gamliel, the third, who's Judah Hanasi's son. And so this is, that's the one of the last texts that we finished with was him. And then then it goes back to, that was the last text we read, but then it goes back to Rabbi Hillel. And the part that we finished with was this great line that is very relevant and appropriate to us. And then again, this was Rabban, this was Rabban Gamliel, son of Judah Hanasi. And then he said, don't judge a man until you've reached his place. And then the last part is, say not, when I have leisure, I shall study. Perhaps you will not have leisure. So don't put aside time to study and say, one day I'll do it, I'll get around to it. You don't know. But that part is actually from Hillel, because Hillel actually starts from here. This was where Hillel started. So again, I was looking for where that line was, and there it was. So Hillel started that section. So it's kind of halfway through that verse or that chapter, or that section of the chapter is that line. But that goes back to the old man himself, to Rabbi Hillel. And that is where we're at. The rest of these texts that follow now actually then go back to Hillel as well. So we read Hillel in his historical chronology with Shammai. Then we follow with his family. And then we went back just this last week. We just started with some more sayings from Hillel. So that's unusual. That's not nowhere else in Pirke Avot do we have one rabbi who's quoted as much as Rabbi Hillel. And we also don't have one where we skip out of chronology and then go to, go through his family and then come back to him. But that's what happens with Hillel. So that's why, again, he's such an important rabbi for not just his family, but for all of us. And that's why we said there's so much that impact that he still has on the world that we follow his teachings. And I mentioned to you before too, that there are Christians who believe that Hillel either taught Jesus or he was part of the Hillel school. And there are people who've written books on this where they look at some of the sayings that Jesus has and look at some of the sayings that Hillel has and say, oh, they sound a lot like what Hillel said, because Hillel definitely lived before Jesus. Question of whether Jesus studied with him, we have no evidence for that. There's no Christian evidence for that. There's no Jewish evidence for that. But there are people who feel that he learned from him because of some of the sayings that are in the Christian Bible. There's no question that the Christian Bible was influenced by Pharisaic rabbinic Judaism, but we don't know about a direct connection between Hillel and Jesus. So let's take a gander at some of what Hillel said. So again, that was the last part. These were Hillel's sayings. Don't separate yourself from the community. Don't trust yourself until the day of your death. Do not judge your fellow man until you've reached this place, and do not say something that cannot be understood. that in the end, it will be understood, right? And say not, when I have leisure I shall study, perhaps you will not. So this week, we come up with some of his other teachings. And this one, I think, is a wonderful teaching for anyone who has ever been a teacher, or whoever wants to be a teacher, or whoever engages in teaching. This is really important. It's a very famous saying of his for within the Jewish community, especially within teachers. He said, "A brute is not sin-fearing, nor is an ignorant person pious, nor can a timid person learn, nor can an impatient person teach, nor will someone who engages too much in business become wise. In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man." So the Yiddish version of that was like, where there's no mensch, be a mensch. And of course, it doesn't have to be a man, a male, but it is the idea that if you live in a place where people aren't behaving in the right way, it's no excuse. It may be harder, but you strive to be a man, which of course stays with me and anybody who's in any role where they get to teach or to facilitate stuff, including like some of the people on here right now, like Joyce did her class yesterday. It's real important to remember that an impatient person shouldn't teach. If you're impatient, you shouldn't teach. It's not a good career choice for people who have a problem with patience. There are a lot of people who have patience problems. A lot of people. I don't, yeah, and I don't mean, and there are some doctors, right? That was Mike's joke. Doctors have patient
Not
problems.
me, Rabbi.
No, what?
Not me, Rabbi.
You don't have a patience problem. No, neither does Mike. But it's a very difficult thing. And there are people who would love to teach and who could teach and who have things that they could teach. But if you're missing that quality of your personality, look, I love my wife. My wife is a remarkable person, but she has no patience. And she'll tell you she has no patience. She has no patience. It's true. Well, I got to keep on my toes. I got to keep moving, but she's got no patience. And she asks me to do something. If it's not done immediately, we got a problem. But she doesn't have patience, but she'll tell you she doesn't have patience. There are people who have lots of patience. There are other people who don't. And I'm not picking on her. I just know that she willingly will tell people that she doesn't have patience. Now, Jesse is teaching. He's been teaching. What do you think about that, Jesse?
Yeah, I just had my first lesson today, actually.
Yeah.
I had my first evaluation on it, and I mean, yeah, I'd say so. There's probably a lot more to it, but yeah, you're working with teenagers, they go at their own pace.
Yeah. It's with any age.
Well, it is. I used to, at work, I used to have to teach certain things at computer classes to adults, and same thing. I mean, you know, it doesn't really matter if they're kids or not.
Yeah. And what Hillel is saying here on a profound level is it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. If you have tremendous amounts of knowledge, and there were rabbis who had tremendous amounts of knowledge, they talk about it. Shammai was one of them. But again, according to some of the stories, Shammai didn't have patience. You know, the stories of him chasing people away, you know, are kind of reflective of that level of, again, at least sometimes where he didn't have patience with someone. Look, there are teachers, I've had them, who are so good and who have so much knowledge that you almost don't care that they don't have patience. And again, especially in, you know, our academies, which are, you know, the college campuses, very rarely does a teacher even have to answer a question, you know, let alone, again, they're supposed to have office hours, but again, if they have their office hours or if people even take them up on their office hours, but there are a lot of people who don't even have to engage in a dialogue. So they don't even have to have that patience anymore. But, and there are people who are so good that you are so, you know, have something to teach that you almost don't care that they have a bad attitude, or they impatient, or they're disrespectful to their students. It's not wonderful. You don't like it, but you put up with it because you realize you're studying with someone who's brilliant. But it's, Hill is basically saying, if you're lacking that quality, don't go into a career of teaching. If you do some teaching, that's one thing. If you have to, but recognize that lack, that skill that you have, that thing that you might be lacking, doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that don't have a thing to do, but you don't teach. You don't teach. So the rabbis, some of them taught, some of them didn't teach. Some of them did other stuff. Some of them were legal, essentially like judges, and patience wasn't like something that they had to have. They had to just be able to know the answer and be able to discern it and give it. And that's what they did. There were other rabbis whose job, I mean, we know this, their job was to essentially be, I know this sounds weird, but that's what they did. They were essentially like hard drives. They just remembered stuff. All they did was remember. They could remember everything. And their job was to be a hard drive. Their job was to recall, say, what rabbi said about, where does it say in the Torah? And they would literally just regurgitate it. That's what they did. They didn't have to have patience. They didn't have to be articulate. They didn't have to make connections. They didn't have to like tell people, well, this is what it says in this situation, so let's do it this way, but in this situation, we do it. They didn't have to, all they had to do was give the answer. That's all. There are people like that. Fine. There's a role for them to play. And we'd say today that maybe some of those people were maybe on the spectrum, right? There could be engineers, right? They can work on a computer and never come out of the office. There's a place for that.
Mhm.
There's a place for people who don't have social skills in the same way. And there were cases like that then too. Now we have this interesting line here about engaging in business, right? We read just previously, this text here, which says that the study of Torah needs to be combined with a worldly occupation. So you're not supposed to just learn Torah, you're supposed to do other stuff too. But here, Hillel, and that wasn't Hillel, so that was one of his descendants, but one of his things here, he says here, is that if you engage in too much business, it's very hard for you to become wise, right? It's tough for you to get that kind of that level of knowledge if you're too much into business, right? It's just,
Calls for balance.
yeah. And so it's telling people, look, maybe that's what your strength is. Business is going to be your strength, but don't expect for you to be able to get all this wisdom either. There's a balance and there's a consequence to what you do. But again, this very, very powerful and famous line that stuck with people, because parents told their kids this for generations in the Jewish community, where there are no mensches, be a mensch. Don't use that as an excuse. Don't say, look, what can I do? Nobody here is, no. You got to be that man. You got to be that mensch in that situation. So this is the line that a lot of people have shared with their children through the generations. Stand up and be a man. Strive to be a man, fine. Doesn't say strive. Well, kind of does. Histadel kind of could be strive, but be that, make sure you're that person. And there's a recognition that, look, it's not always easy. There are places where it's harder to be a man than it's harder to be a good person in certain places, but that doesn't mean you say, I'm not going to do it. It's a challenge. You do it. So this is this is kind of reflections on Hillel, from Hillel on on what kind of qualities, people have. By the way, we didn't really talk about this one, but a timid person can't learn, right? So as much as an impatient person can't teach, a timid person can't learn. And this is something that, told my kids, I'll tell other kids, don't be shy in school. Don't be afraid to ask a question. If you're think you don't understand something or you think you might have a different understanding of it, don't be afraid. It's almost impossible to learn if you're not willing to ask questions. And you're probably going to miss something. So don't be timid. That's the good lesson for students as well. So this is a weird one. And this is known from the texts, from discussions on the text. Of all the lines in Pirke Avot, this was a weird one because, well, let's take a look. So Hillel once saw a skull floating on the face of the water. He said to it, because you drowned others, they drowned you. And in the end, they that drowned you will be drowned. So it's a weird line for a lot of reasons. First of all, it sticks out in that we haven't had any sayings where somebody saw something and reacted to it. The sayings that we've had up until now have been sayings that people could say whenever, in an academy and on the street and in their house. They haven't been story. I mean, this is almost like a story, right? He sees something and he reflects on it and he tells. This is much more like the stories we have in the Talmud or stories we have in the Midrash, where there's like a little story and there's a lesson in the story. Here, there's a lesson. Now, in the Midrash, the Midrashic explanations of this line are interesting because, like, how do you know? How do you know the guy was a guy who drowned people? You don't know that. I mean, like, you wouldn't know that. It's not necessarily. It's just not necessarily like a person could have died by accident. Could have. The body could have washed down there. It could have been a burial and it washed away. I mean, like, how do you know? Just by seeing a skull. So you have explanations about it that, the way the skull was floating, indicated that this was not somebody who died by accident. He saw there was damage, like there was like a arrow or some kind of, beating on the skull where it looked like it was fractured, like, all these theories about how he knew. He's Hillel, so, maybe he had some insights, divine insights or something, like he knew. But it seems like well, it's not here. I mean, we don't know. But the reflection that Hillel has here is an interesting one because whether or not the person was murdered and whether he knew that or however he knew that, it's an interesting reflection because there's this understanding that the cycle of violence it's a cycle, right? It doesn't stop. When someone murders somebody, they're likely going to get murdered. And then the people that murdered them will likely get murdered. It's a cycle of violence that just doesn't stop. There's no end to it. And so it's an interesting reflection. It's one where, you kind of say, well, that's true. Whether or not this person in particular had been murdered, the reality that somebody who murders somebody is probably going to get murdered, and then the people that murder him are probably going to get murdered. It's true. It's a timeless, unfortunately, a timeless truth. And it's one where you go, hey, maybe for most of us, that's a world that's very far removed. But, as I've reflected, and oftentimes when I reflect on my 7 years working in the Department of Corrections, I met with a lot of people who had killed people and who 100% expected to be killed. Not in jail, not by the state of California, because we don't execute people anymore, but by people that were back on the street. So for some people, being in prison is maybe the one place where they could get killed in prison too, but in some cases, people actually felt in a weird way that they were out of the cycle of violence. Again, there is violence in prison, but some people actually opted out of being in the violence. Well, let me put it this way. Even with the violence that does exist in prison, for many of those people, it was a lot less violent than the world that they lived in before they were in prison. So it actually slowed down and was safer for them in prison. And believe it or not, well, I'm sure you can believe it, there were people who found that to be an escape and actually didn't necessarily want to go back to their communities because they just didn't know when they were going to get killed. They knew they'd get killed if they were back on the streets. So it's an interesting situation where people actually want to be in prisons because it's safer for them and it means that they're not part of that cycle anymore. And for some people, it was also, quite frankly, they didn't want to kill people anymore. They just knew that if they were in a gang lifestyle, that they were going to continue to kill people and that they would probably be killed at some point also. And so looking over their shoulder all the time was difficult. Again, it's not that they don't look over their shoulder there, but oftentimes it was not as constant and is not as the likelihood of you being killed inside prison was much smaller than it was when they were on the outside. So it still happens. It doesn't happen in the world that you and I inhabit a lot, but it does happen in some worlds and some life styles that people have. And so his meditation on violence and on
I mean, he's also talking about, at least I was thinking that, because I always make that comment, especially now in high schools, I always say that time is a flat circle. Like everything repeats itself.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just mean about, murder, but, when I look at the news, especially when there was a lot of gossip and controversy in Hollywood, I'm thinking it's always the bad people in Hollywood who are now complaining about the bad things being done to them. Like you always know about the stand-up characters in Hollywood, that never happens to them.
No, it's,
Right? Like there's
yeah,
people
no,
that
it's true.
Yeah, like there's, moral people in the movies like Keanu Reeves. You don't hear him complaining about bad things being done to him because he doesn't do bad things to people.
Yeah, yeah, it does happen. Absolutely, you're right. It happens without just murder or death being a part of the cycle. But yes, it is part of a cycle of other people, as Jesse's pointing out, not necessarily just murder, but damage that people do to each other, and then the damage comes back to them, and then somebody, they're surprised when the next person gets knocked down by somebody else. But yeah, definitely happens. Somebody forwarded me an article that was in the Jewish press recently about, it was kind of talking about how back in the day, well, the article was about how Jews need to protect themselves better, but it went back to the times of the 20s and 30s in America where there were Jewish gangsters, but Jewish gangsters were also, one of the things that they did is they wanted Jews to protect themselves, and there were Jewish gang. This was in Jewish News Service, JNS, in the last couple of days. It was something about how Jews need to be tough again. But they talked about how Meyer Lansky and some of the Jewish gangsters were, put together these kind of Jewish protection groups. Weren't gangs. They were literally blue collar Jews that, defended their communities, which we don't have anymore. We don't have blue collar Jews, and we don't have many blue collar Jews, and we don't have these kinds of groups. So again, you can look it up. It's like why Jews need to be tough again. And actually,
Don't the Hasidics in New York do something like that?
they do, but
They have I remember I saw a video on that. It's some
yeah, the Hasidic community has their own defense organization.
It's like a kitted up like E350 Ford or whatever. It's like an ambulance. It's a pickup truck. It's a mechanic's vehicle. Like it does everything.
Yeah.
And so any kind of issues a Jew in the community might have, they help out. Like they can fix a flat, unclog a drain, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's part of it. Well, here's the story. It's time for American Jews to toughen up. And I mean, unfortunately, I used the picture of Bugsy Siegel, but this was something he talked about. Recruited Jews who worked with their hands were called upon to protect Jewish street peddlers and storekeepers from anti-Semitic thugs. These folks made sure Jew haters and supporters of Hitler had a fight on their hands when they threatened Jews. It's true. I mean, this is what we did. Again, we don't want to have to go back to that, but so, and again, the article is not about glamorizing that, but I do want to point out, what is the point of this? Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel were very successful Jewish gangsters. I mean, Bugsy Siegel helped build Las Vegas, as the movies and the literature is out there about that. And Meyer Lansky lived his entire natural life, essentially running, some very bad, criminal organizations. But what's very interesting about those two guys and most Jewish gangsters is they didn't pass it on to their children. Meyer Lansky's kids didn't become gangsters. He lived out his whole life. It's not like, somebody killed him. In the Godfather, his character gets killed. Mo Green gets killed, but in reality, Meyer Lansky died of old age in Florida. Bugsy Siegel did. Maybe Meyer Lansky was actually responsible for ordering his kid. But the point is that none of these people passed it on to their kids. It was not the case in the mafia. It was not the case on the Italian side, where people had generational allegiances, family allegiances, whether it was the five families or the Gottis, all these people who moved into the five families. We didn't do that. The Jewish mafia ended almost as soon as it started, because it lasted through one generation, because we knew, and the gangsters knew, this was not a life to pass on. That doesn't excuse them from the bad things that they did. But what it teaches us is that those kinds of values are inconsistent with Jewish values. They're inconsistent with our community. It doesn't work. And there are other communities that have generational criminal elements because they're acceptable. There's an exception made for it. And again, I don't want to pick on one, because we're almost the one community where this doesn't happen. I mean, again, whether it's a triad, whether it's a gang, whether it's the the mafia, whatever it is, we just don't tolerate it. And it doesn't mean that there aren't individual the Russian Jewish mafia is a real thing and is very scary, but it doesn't pass on because people don't want their family to be involved in it. I had a friend whose father and grandfather was kind of his grandfather, and even his father moved away from it, was one of the leaders of the Russian mafia, Jewish mafia here in LA. But his family didn't want it to continue. And he's a lawyer now, and he doesn't talk about his family's background, but it just didn't work. It wasn't going to work as well, that's just what they do. So this article is an interesting article, because obviously they're not in telling us that we need to go back to having Jewish gangsters, but they are talking about the fact that we do need to make sure that we protect ourselves. And I would argue we do. We have our first Krav Maga class tomorrow, and we've had 2 gun training classes in the last month and a half, and we're going to continue to do this. It's going to be part of well after October 7th becomes a part of our history. This is going to be part of our reality. We're not going to, our Jewish calendar, weekly calendar, is going to have self-defense and the incorporation of Jewish physical defense and physical strength be part of who we are. Not because we want to have a fight with somebody, but because we're going to be prepared. Not because we want to have a thing to happen, but because we're going to do everything we can to stop it from happening before it starts. So that's also, again, having a sense internally of Jewish strength and Jewish and the fact that we're not going to be in fear. So yeah, count on that continuing. So let's continue with Hillel's after Hillel's reflection on the skull, which again is unusual in the Pirke Avot. We don't have a lot of here's something that happened to me and I'm going to teach you something. All right. But this is a very interesting one, not one of his more well-known ones, but one that I find an interesting structure and an interesting one for a lot of reasons. So we'll be talking about this one for the next few minutes. He used to say, this is Hillel, the more flesh, the more worms, the more property, the more anxiety, the more wives, the more witchcraft, the more female slaves, the more lewdness, the more slaves, the more robbery, the more Torah, the more life, the more sitting in the company of scholars, the more wisdom, the more counsel, the more understanding, the more charity, the more peace. And it ends with, if one acquires a good name, he has acquired something for himself. If one acquires for himself the knowledge of Torah, he has acquired life in the world to come. So let's talk about the structure of the first part of that, right? The more something, the more something. So it starts, so the more of one thing, the more of the next of the consequence to that, right? And so that's structured that way. And then within that, there's the negative and then the positive. So this is what you don't want to have, but then we get to what you do want to have. So these are consequences, right? These are things that that if we looked at the first part of it, we'd go, well, what's wrong with that? Especially for the first ones, right? Because of course the consequence is not a good one. So the interesting thing here is the more flesh, the more worms, right? What's he talking about here? This is literally more basar, the more meat, the more worms. Again, it doesn't, like some people have said, well, maybe he's just talking about meat. He's not talking about meat. He's not talking about eating food, because that is true. The more meat you have, the more likelihood you are going to have worms or some kind of bug in it. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the bigger you are, the more corpulent you are, to use a fancy term, the more there is for the worms to eat. What's he talking about? Well, the fact that back in the old days, being large was not a source of shame, especially during the Roman era. Somebody who walked around with a massive frame was basically saying to everybody, I don't work a lot because I can't work with a body frame like this. I must be eating and partying a lot. And so that was seen as a sign of wealth. Being large was a sign of wealth. People have talked about this. What does it mean for the body image for us in our day? The fact that when we look at the depiction of beautiful women up through the Renaissance period, that heavier women were depicted as the more attractive because it implied that they didn't work, that they were being kept and that they were being celebrated because they didn't have to work. They could just sit around and eat. And so that was seen as a sign of wealth and success. Being light-skinned meant you didn't have to be outside. You weren't working. Now we've flipped those, right? Because now somebody who is really fit must have a lot of time to be in the gym. If you're tanned, it's because you are either paying to have a really nice tan or you're out on the beach while everyone else is in their offices working. So we flipped what are the attractive outside qualities, and they're not what our ancestors would have thought would have been signs of wealth and success. Well, Hillel flipped it even before that, because he's basically saying, look, if you die with all your physical success of your accumulation of wealth, all you've done is given more for the worms to eat after you die. It's a very, very grim assessment of what happens to you. It's a can't take it with you, right? But coming right after the skull floating on the water, it shows kind of a dark side of Rabbi Hillel. It shows you that Hillel is not afraid to go dark on people. And this is really dark. This is something that I've thought about before. I think anybody who thinks about death or has ever reflected on it has thought to themselves, all of that time you spent taking care of your body, or, thinking of your body as being, a reflection of your success, It's just going into the ground. So it's a weird way of looking at it because it's definitely not, well, it's kind of scary and it's also kind of depressing, but there's this understanding that that's not what you need to be using as a gauge for your success. Because the other things here are also not going to help you. Not in this world and not in the next. Because look, it starts with what happens after you die, which is that you become food for worms. And it ends with the fact that what we really want is knowledge of Torah, because that's your ticket to heaven. That's where you are in the world to come. You're with your Torah in the world to come. It's your Torah. It's the Torah that you've accumulated in this world that's going to be in the next world. Your essence connected to the Torah that you've accumulated is who you are in the next world. That's all that matters. All the stuff that we think about that's important here, it's not. So he starts with the body. And he gets into these other things like property, right? The more property, the more anxiety. Well, that's true. That's true. It's true. I mean, you can say, that's not a reason to not have property, because obviously you need to have some basic things. But he's saying at the end of the day, the more stuff you have, the more stuff you have out there in the world, it's just more anxiety. It's just more stuff you have to worry about. Those things, if you're concerned about them, because if you're concerned about them, you want them, then you're going to worry about losing them. Did my property value go down? Did my stock portfolio go down? It's just more stuff to worry about. So after, again, a certain point, it's just stuff to worry about. That's a pretty heavy duty thing to lay down on people. Now, the next one's an interesting one because, of course, during the rabbinic period, people could still be married to more than one wife. But what this kind of teaches us is that even during the rabbinic period, early rabbinic period, that people were definitely encouraging people not to have numerous wives, to not engage in polygamy. That, again, according to him, the more wives you had, the more likelihood you had for witchcraft in your home. What is he talking about? He's talking about one wife casting a spell against the other wife or against you so that you find this woman not attractive, find me more attractive. I want to be with that husband, so I'm going to cast a spell that he loves me more. Who needs that business? First of all, you're not supposed to be engaged in witchcraft at all. But this kind of activity, the more women you have running around the house, the more likelihood you're going to have that kind of stuff going on. He's definitely not encouraging it. Of the rabbis that we read about in the Mishnah and in the Midrash, in the rabbinic text, very rarely do we ever see a rabbi who's married to more than one wife. Very rarely, almost never. It's not that we can kind of gauge by certain things that, that maybe there were people who occasionally were married to more than one woman, but it was not common by the rabbinic period. So sometime between the biblical period and the rabbinic period, it became less common. It probably became less common well before the rabbinic period. So by the time of the exile, it already seems like people were not, maybe like the likelihood wouldn't be that someone was polygamous. Polygamy definitely thrived and existed in a more defined and kind of organic way, if you want to call it that. It's hard to say this, but it's true. It made sense in a tribal situation, not so much in a non-tribal situation, where a woman could maintain her own tent and her own house, her own family within that tent. It was able to happen. When people lived in cities and they shared a home, meaning a building, even if they had separate rooms, you couldn't really escape the other people. They were your next door neighbor. If things weren't going well, you can always move your tent a little bit. You can't move your building. And to have two women or two wives in the same building that were not getting along would have been very hard. It would also just be very hard for the family to deal with the close proximity and the rivalries and the gossip that were going on when people were engaged in a more metro urban life didn't work as well. And so it probably started to go down even before, as Jews moved away from tribal life and pastoral life, as they were living more and more in cities, we see it becoming a lot less common. And we know that from the architecture. We can see that from the archaeology of digging up some of these towns and villages. They don't appear to be homes that were multiple family homes, which you would have had to have if you had more wives. So he's definitely not encouraging people to do that, which would also be a reflection of wealth, of your success. Am I expanding my household by adding another wife as a sign of wealth? That's what happens in societies where polygamy is allowed. So when I've gone to Arab countries where polygamy is allowed, if I talk to somebody, I remember talking, I was in my 20s when I went to Egypt, and I was talking to a young guy my age in Egypt. And he said, I said to him, I jokingly said to him, how many wives you had? He said, I have 2. The guy was my age. I'm like, you have 2 wives already? He goes, yeah. He says, I'm hoping to have 4, which is kind of the maximum you're supposed to have in a normal situation. Unless you're like a sheikh who has a lot of money, you're not supposed to have more than 4 wives. You know, the Quran teaches that that's really the maximum that you can have, you can maintain. So I said to him, you want to have 4? He goes, yeah. He goes, when I'm wealthy enough, when I'm rich enough. So he knew that he could only do that when he had the wealth to maintain, you know, 4 homes. And he was a fisherman. So I don't know, I guess, you know, maybe he would eventually have enough success that he would be married to 4 different women, but it was pretty wild to understand that, again, that was a reflection of success. A reflection of wealth was how many women you were married to. On top of that, you could have slaves, right, in those days. And those slaves are actually here given out as women, and the first one is nashim, or wives or women. The other one is shvachot, which are concubines, or women who would be handmaidens. They're not your wives, but they are women that you could have had relationships with. And they're saying, if you do that, you're going to have more lewdness. And that's not a good thing. You think, oh, well, that's what you got them for. Well, it's not, because lewdness is never a good thing. Even if you were married to more than one woman, even if you had female slaves, lewdness was not something that you were shooting for, at least in our community. And then it goes to avadim, which is the word we use for slaves. And again, here they differentiate it as male slaves. And if you have a lot, then you have gazel, you have robbery. And what's interesting about that, of course, is that that implies that the more people you have in your household, that you're maintaining in your household, the more likelihood that they will steal from you. And that is, that's a reflection, again, of people saying, well, look at how much stuff I have, and look how many slaves I have. And of course, what that also means is that you have a lot of problems, and you're increasing those problems the more you increase these things. So again, marbeb means to increase, to have a lot of. If you increase these things, you're going to increase those things. And so these are not things you have to have. You don't have to have these things. And if you do that, there's going to be a consequence to it. And the consequences, obviously, for the first stuff are not good. But then we get to the good stuff. And the stuff that comes the first is Torah. And the more Torah you have, it simply says the more life. Now, at the end, it says your Torah is eternal life. So it's not just life in this world. It's very clear that it is life in the world to come. Chayei ha'olam haba. But here it simply says life. And then it says here again, the more yeshiva, which means literally sitting, but we know the word yeshiva doesn't just mean sitting. It means, as we say, A yeshiva is a place where we have as an academy. So I wouldn't really translate it as sitting. I would translate it as the more academy, the more studying together. So Torah and then yeshiva. One could actually also say that the yeshiva is the place where people are studying the Torah with the oral Torah, right? So it's actually also the place where people are studying rabbinic literature. They're studying the commentary. So Torah, also more study of the commentary, the more knowledge, which is obviously, again, what we're looking for. These are the first thing are things we're not looking for. What we're looking for on the other side, we should be looking for is life, more wisdom. And then, of course, the next one is if you're acquiring yourself counsel, the more understanding you're getting. If you're increasing that, you're getting more understanding. Marbeh etzah, more marbeh tefuna. Again, more along the lines of knowledge and understanding. But then we get to this next one, which is tzedakah, righteousness, right? Which they translated it here as the more charity. I think that the translation of righteousness is probably a little bit better of an understanding, because charity assumes that it's monetary, some kind of help that you're giving to people through, and again, we oftentimes say tzedakah is charity, but it's not, it's righteousness. And in the wider understanding of it, it is justice. And so if you're acquiring and if you're increasing, if you're making for yourself more righteousness, you'll have more peace, you'll have more shalom, which of course makes sense. The more tzedakah you're creating, the more righteousness, the more justice and fairness that you're creating, the more peace you're going to have. And so those are the things that you're supposed to increase. You're supposed to marbeh, and again, the word marbeh is increasing. And then the last part actually then is a play on that. It says kana, which is acquire for yourself. So you can say that all of these things you're increasing. Sometimes there's a monetary cost to them. But sometimes, again, there isn't. Sometimes it's just your effort. And when it says kana Shem Tov, when it says acquire for yourself a good name, a Shem Tov, right? You're acquiring for yourself something that is yours. Your good name. And the way it reads in English, it's almost like the first one isn't as good as the second one. It's not really that. It's telling you to do both. Get for yourself a good name. That is really what you have. It's really all you have is your name. And then when it says, get for yourself divrei Torah, get for yourselves words of Torah, then you've acquired for yourself the world to come. Now, obviously, eternity is a lot better than, what you get for yourself, but it's not really, you could say one of them's for this world and one of them's for the next world. They're not like, it's not one, get one, not the other. What's interesting about these things is that these are all things that are free. Well, they're not free, but they don't cost it. There's no monetary cost for them. You don't have to have money to get a good name. You don't need money to get words of Torah. Torah is free. You can get Torah everywhere. Torah, have access to it. It's everywhere. Open up a hotel. There's a Bible right there. It's everywhere. And so what's interesting about these last things are the word acquire, kana, oftentimes is the word we use for purchasing something, acquiring it, owning it. That's what the word is. Kana means to literally own it. And what he's saying is the stuff that you really own isn't something that costs anything, but that's what really matters. And what really matters is acquiring a good name for yourself and acquiring yourself Torah, because one of them leads to what really matters. It's what you will be known for. And the other one is how you are going to acquire world to come. So they're both really important. Shem Tov and Divrei Torah. So all the good things that he says you should increase, the things that you should have more of, some of those things you can maybe argue, they require a lot of money, or they require a lot of effort. They require something. But the last couple of things, he's almost saying the things you really have to purchase, the things you really have to acquire, the things you need to own, those are things like a good name and your Torah. So that's why Hillel's saying here is such a kind of like a powerful laying out of what are the principles that you need to have in life? What are the things that you need? What are the things that really count? And this is, again, some of them are so anachronistic. I mean, we're not going to think about wives and witchcraft anymore. We're not going to think about those kind of things, but there are some that are definitely we've never stopped dealing with. And what really matters. Again, these are you can't take it with you kinds of lines, but they're much more powerful, and they're much more thought-provoking than just simply telling somebody you can't take it with you. But if you had to summarize it,
Rabbi?
that's kind of what he's saying. Yeah, please, some discussion on this.
The last sentence, and we've discussed this a little bit before, maybe in the past. It's really the first time we're seeing anything in regards to the
What
world
happens
to come.
after you die? Yeah.
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 Remember, I've asked you that. I said, do we see it? We see a little bit with Samuel, and then the Old Testament really doesn't, the five books don't really mention it much.
Nope. And so we do have it in the rabbinic text several times, in many places, but we haven't really had much of it up until now. We've had a couple of lines about it so far in Pirke Avot, but not a lot. It will be pervasive throughout, but it's an interesting question, considering that the book is really about how to live. Again, the focus, like much of Judaism, is not on the world to come. It's on this world. What's interesting, of course, is that that's the only one of those things that really he goes through. That's the only one. That's the first time that he actually talks about the world to come. The rest of it has to do with how we live in this world, what we're gonna get from these things, right? You get a lot of property, yeah, you're gonna have a lot of anxiety. That's not a world to come issue. That's this world. So of all those lines, that's the only one that deals with specifically with that. But there are lines coming up in Pirke Avot that deal with the world to come. And the rabbis definitely believe that you and I have to believe in that. They actually said that. You have to believe in the world to come. Otherwise, you don't get it. So they actually said that. So they said, if you don't believe it, you're not going to have it. So they definitely wanted people to believe in it. And as we said, that's also because the Sadducees, the priests, didn't believe in the world to come. And so they were really separating themselves, distinguishing themselves from them by saying there is a world to come. There is something that happens after you die, and you got to believe that. And so they really were differentiating themselves from this other large trend that they were dealing with. Once the temple was destroyed and they became kind of the voice for the community, that meant they had a greater impact on it. But one can make the argument that after the temple was destroyed, Judaism became much more of a religion that focused on the world to come, because to some extent, the priesthood and the sacrificial rituals are very much about a way to cleanse yourself and get yourself right with God, so that you don't have to worry about eternal damnation or anything else, or eternal balance, because it's going to get fixed in this world. So when somebody said, well, how do we fix our relationship with God? Somebody said, well, God will take care of it later on. And a priest would say, well, just offer a sacrifice. I don't want to say it's as simple as that, but some of the priests, that was their theology. So I think, once the temple was destroyed, it was much easier to make that claim that, hey, God's going to have to fix our problems in the world to come. It's not just a matter of what God will do in this world. It'll be something we see then. But remember, Hillel writes during the time of the temple. Hillel died before the temple was standing when he died. So it's not like he's writing this and there isn't a temple. So people believed in it already. It wasn't like, so like sometimes people like think, oh, the temple was destroyed and then everyone was a rabbi after that. Everyone followed that tradition. No, because he lived before that and he was teaching people this before that. He doesn't really talk about sacrifices here at all. He doesn't reflect on that. He's not saying, hey, the more sacrifices you do, the better you are. He could have said that. He doesn't say that. He says tzedakah. You know, when he's talking about what you have to do in this world, he's talking about studying. He's talking about performing tzedakah, you know, or working towards, you know, a world with more and more tzedakah. You know, this isn't, hey, the more sacrifices you give. So probably again reflects the fact that for a lot of Jews, even while the temple stood, that was not the answer for them. Any other questions, comments? I don't know when I first read this, but it definitely stayed with me as a kid. The more flesh, the more worms. It's just something you say to yourself when you look at yourself in the mirror going, you're providing the worms a really healthy dose of food. And that's all I tell myself when I'm looking at the mirror going, oh man, a lot of worms there. So it should prompt you to get into the gym. No, it's definitely stayed with me that again, what are the priorities? What are the things we're supposed to get? So now the next guy we're going to read about is Yochanan ben Zakkai. And we talk about rabbis who lived during the time of the temple. This dude was one of the most important because Yochanan ben Zakkai, we've talked about him in the past. I'll just remind people, he was the rabbi who actually escaped Jerusalem to help establish the academy at Yavne. There's a very famous story in the Talmud in the recounting of the destruction of Jerusalem as Jerusalem was being destroyed. He was an older man by then, so he studied with Hillel, and Hillel died around right around the time of Jesus, or around that time. And then about 30, 40 years later, it's Yochanan ben Zakkai's time. He's the leader of the community. Again, even though Hillel had his family that were leaders, there were other leaders too. Yochanan ben Zakkai was one of them. And there's a very famous story about how he gets out of Jerusalem during the siege. The siege was the Roman siege of Jerusalem, and no one could go in and out. And there's a very famous scene where he goes and talks to his nephew, who's the leader of the Zealots. He's the leader of the Sicarii, the Jews who wanted to fight to the death, the ones who eventually went to Masada. So he talks with his nephew, who's the leader of the Sicarii, who was making sure that no one got out, that no Jews tried to defect. They'd kill him if they tried to defect. So he goes to his nephew and he says, nephew, you got to get me out of here. This is over. This is done. Jerusalem's over. He goes, I know. He says, well, uncle, he says, I can't leave. If I leave, they'll kill me. You can't leave. Everybody knew Yochanan ben Zakkai. So what they did is they faked his death. They said that he was dead. They smuggled his body out of the city in a coffin. He got on the other side of the wall, got out. Now, the story goes on that he actually met the Roman general Vespasian, who was the general who was in charge of the siege of Jerusalem. And he told the Roman general, he said, you're going to be the next Caesar. And Vespasian said, what are you talking about? He said, I'm not going to be Caesar. Why would you say that? That's disrespectful. And he looked at him and he says, you're going to be the next Caesar. And according to the text, Vespasian took that to heart and liked it. He liked the fact that this guy called him out and said, you're going to be the next Caesar. And sure enough, that year, which we call the year of the 4 Roman emperors, there were 4 Roman emperors, generals, who made claims to the throne. Vespasian was the one who won. And the deal that he made with Vespasian, he says, if you become Caesar like I think you are, you have to let me establish an academy at Yavne, which was near Tel Aviv, modern day Tel Aviv, it was on the coast. And he did. So Vespasian let him set up the academy. And it's a story of, a rabbi who makes a deal with the devil, if you will, but it worked. And some Jews got to survive because they got out. And the academy was set up by Yochanan ben Zakkai. So, yeah, it's an interesting tale. And Josephus, who wrote about the history of the Jews at this period, has a similar tale of how he survived and was able to defect to the Romans essentially, but he really defected. He went back to Rome with Vespasian and became a patron. He was supported by Vespasian. He even changed his name to Flavius Josephus after his patron Flavius Vespasian. He took on his name and he wrote the history of the Jews. Similar story of crossing over and surviving. But Yochanan ben Zakkai did it for the sake of preserving the Jewish people and is usually seen as a hero for keeping Judaism alive. So he learned, according to this, he received the tradition. Literally, he received the tradition from Hillel and Shammai. He got it from both, it says. He studied with both of them. And he used to say, if you've learned much Torah, do not claim credit for yourself, because for such a purpose you were created. And that is Yochanan ben Zakkai saying, which is pretty powerful, because you don't say, well, look at how much Torah I know. Nope. You're there to learn Torah. So you don't run around going, look how much Torah I know. You were created for that reason. That's not anything other than your purpose in this world. So that's a very humbling and very important way of viewing the knowledge that you have, which is you were created for that. It was not, it's nothing to brag about. But then it goes on to say Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples. So he had 5 rabbis that studied with him. They were Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah, Rabbi Yossi the priest, Rabbi Shimon ben Netaniel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. So these are all rabbis who lived during the Roman period, during the Roman destruction. Guess what? A lot of them died. A lot of them were murdered. A lot of them, a lot of his students didn't make it through. This was a very dangerous time for the rabbis, and they could easily be caught in a city that was under siege by the Romans, not just Jerusalem, but other cities. And so it was a dangerous time. A couple of things about his students, and we know about a lot of these guys. We read about them in the Talmud. Interestingly, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, one of the very famous rabbis of the academy. What's interesting, one of the interesting things about him is not only he has a very interesting history. The stories about him are interesting. He eventually gets excommunicated, but it's interesting that his name is Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus is a very Greek name. So it shows you that some of the rabbis had fathers that had Roman or Greek names, and then they had a Hebrew name, and vice versa. There were people who had Hebrew names as their father's name, and their name was Greek. So it shows us that there were, even amongst the rabbis, there were these kinds of situations. Now, I will tell you that there's stories about Eliezer ben Hyrcanus that his father was Jewish, but was very Greek, and was why he would have a Greek name, but that he did not encourage his son to become a rabbi, and Eliezer did it anyways. But here's what he says, and you see one of them, Rabbi Yossi, is a priest, is actually a Kohen. So you see that Sadducees, not every priest was necessarily a Sadducee. Some of them became Pharisees, became rabbis, and so Yossi is one of them. But here's what he says about these guys, right? Here's what he says about his students. He says, Rabbi Yochanan used to say about them, their outstanding virtues, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is a plastered cistern, which loses not a drop. So that means he's like a well that you can put the water in and it never evaporates, it never leaks out, it never goes away. It's plastered, which means it's not just like a well where it seeps through. He doesn't lose the information. Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah, happy is the woman that gave birth to him. Well, it doesn't really tell us much about what he knew or how he knew it, but it does tell us that he was a good guy, and the person, again, his mom should be very happy that she was able to have him as a son. Rabbi Yossi the priest is a pious man. Rabbi Shimon ben Nathaniel is one that fears sin. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is like a spring that ever gathers force. So what's interesting about the first and the last is that they both have something to do with water. They both have water imagery that are used for them. But it shows you again that the rabbis would compare people and compare things to things that they knew about, wells and springs and things like that. But here's what he says about them. That's very powerful when we consider what happens to some of these people. Rabbi Yochanan used to say, if all the sages of Israel were on one scale of the balance and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on the other scale, he would outweigh them all. Abba Shaul said in his name, if all the sages of Israel were on this one scale of the balance and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus also with them, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach on the other scale, he would outweigh them all. So there is a difference of opinion between Abba Shaul and Yochanan over which one of those rabbis was the greatest, because Elazar ben Arach, at least according to him, Abba Shaul was the most impressive. But the fact that Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, at least to Yochanan, who was his teacher, Abba Shaul is another rabbi that lived at the time, but he's not as well known as Yochanan. Yochanan ben Zakkai says that Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was on one side of the scale. And what's interesting about Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is that he again ends up running afoul of the community, but not because of his lack of knowledge. It's not that gets Eliezer ben Hyrcanus in trouble. What Eliezer ben Hyrcanus gets in trouble for is that he's willing to literally destroy the academy for the sake of being right. And the very famous story of the oven of Achnai, he's the one who argues that this oven in particular needs to be viewed as not kosher, and the rest of the rabbis argue with him. And he says, if I'm right, let the tree, get uprooted, and it does, and let the water turn its course, the river out in front, let the river turn, and it does. All these things happen. Finally, God, he says, let God tell you that I'm right, and God does. And in that famous scene we talked about, we read Deuteronomy, I told you, God says to them, Eliezer's right. And the rabbis say to God, but you told us we have the Torah. Lo bashamayim hi, it's not in heaven. And God says, yeah, you're right. And what happens after that is Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, all his teachings are destroyed, and he gets thrown out because he was willing to destroy everything, go alone on that to be right. And they said, you can't do that. You can't separate from the community. And you can't go against the rest of the academy. Even if you're right, technically you're right, you're going to destroy the community. So Eliezer becomes a lesson in the willingness of one person to go it alone, which again is interesting because this happens during the time of Christianity. And some people would have said, well, whether or not Jesus was right or not, you can't go it alone. You can't leave the community. You can't leave the accepted structure of the community because the community can't hold it together. So whether it was Jesus or whether it was somebody else, the community couldn't have every rabbi going, well, if you don't like it, I'm taking my stuff and we're going to go a different direction. Couldn't have that. Community would be destroyed. And so the rabbi said, we have to have a majority rule. We have to have a system where we have to be able to disagree, but at the same time, have a ability to say, but we're all on the same page. And at the end of the day, they were arguing over an oven. So one rabbi was willing to destroy everything because he was right, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your interpretation's right. If you're not willing to accept the rule of the majority, we can't have a community this way. You can't say, well, I'm right, you're all wrong. And, I'll destroy everything because I think I'm right. Community can't, any community can't work like that. So that's Eliezer Ben Hyrcanus. That's not the last time we're going to meet him, but this was his student. So here's what, let's read this section talking about his students. Rabbi Yochanan said unto them, go forth and observe which is the right way to which a man should cleave. So you guys go out there and tell me, what should a person do in life? What's the way that they should follow? So Rabbi Eliezer said, a good eye. Rabbi Joshua said, a good companion. Rabbi Yossi said, a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said, foresight. Rabbi Elazar said, a good heart. Rabban Yochanan said to them, I prefer the words of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, for in his words, your words are included. So, what does he say? Rabbi Elazar said, a good heart. Why? Because he said Yochanan says all the other ones, if you have a good heart, all the other ones are included in it. Good eye, a good neighbor, a good companion, foresight. All of them are a part of having a good heart. So he puts it at the end, of course, because that's the one that you can now say all the others are included in that, right? But that's the setup for that. That's the teaching that Rabbi Yochanan gives us, which is, again, a good heart. So they all have to come up with what's the most important thing, right? And that's what he said. Then Rabban Yochanan said to them, go forth and observe which is the evil way which a man should shun. Rabbi Eliezer said, an evil eye. Well, it's kind of what he said, a good eye, but flipped it. Rabbi Joshua said, an evil companion. Rabbi Yossi said, an evil neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said, one who borrows and does not repay what he borrows. From the man who borrows, it says, one who borrows from God, blessed be he. As it is said, the wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous deal graciously and give. There's actually a quote from the Bible, from Psalms. So Rabbi Shimon gives a really long description. Rabbi Elazar said, an evil heart. And Rabban Yochanan said to them, I prefer the words of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, for in his words, your words are included. So, again, the way that they flip it, is interesting, right? Which again, because before Rabbi Shimon simply said a foresight, and then he changes it with a little expository lesson on borrowing and quoting the Bible, and doesn't matter. Rabban Yochanan, doesn't want to hear it. He just says, Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, Elazar's heart thing, it works both ways. Good heart, good, bad heart, stay away from it. So, it comes away with a little bit of a different kind of teaching here, which is again similar to what we have with Rabbi Hillel, which is a little story, or a little, go out and do something and then teach us. So it's a little bit of a narrative, a little bit, not it's not critical. I mean, he could have simply just asked each one of his students, what is it? And they all answer. But even that is a dialogue. Even that's a little bit of a story. But yeah, this is a longer one. This one, as you can see, is a fairly long section. But again, it shows us something too, which is the dialogue and the discussion that a teacher and his student would have had. And also the fact that, again, some of these rabbis, Rabbi Hillel, Rabbi Yochanan, had many, many students. And not only did they have many students, but they had many students that were recognized. They had many students that were great teachers on their own, and had many disciples of their own. So these people not only taught people, but they taught people who would then teach other people. And so the legacy multiplied. And we have that within the rabbinic model that we have now that we're seeing and that we'll see also later on in this, which is, from the beginning, we actually have had it, get for yourself a great teacher and also, make sure you raise up many students. So there's a chain of transmission that we see. And it's also, again, not only learning from the right people, but also then teaching other people afterwards, that the obligation to then teach others. And so then the teachings go exponentially. Then, one person teaches 10 people who then those 10 people teach 10 people. And so it's an exponential growth of learning. So it's a wonderful way of reminding us that we're part of these links, and we have the ability through this chain to go back all the way to these people, and then to go all the way forward to countless people in the future who will have a chance to be attached to us through our teaching, through the words that we share with them. So again, the purpose of us learning this is so that we can then teach it and share it with other people. It says here, they, his students, each said 3 things. Rabbi Eliezer said, let the honor of your friend be as dear to you as your own, and do not be easily provoked to anger, and repent one day before your death. And he also said, warm yourself before the fire of the wise, and be aware of being singed by the glowing coals, for their bite is the bite of a fox, and their sting is the sting of a scorpion. And their hiss is the hiss of a serpent, and all their words are like coals of fire. So there's a lot there that he says. It seems like he said more than 3 things, but the 3 things are the first one is, let the honor of your friend be as dear to you as your own. Don't be easily provoked to anger, and repent one day before your death. Those are the 3 things that he says. That's his threefold saying. He also said was like another teaching that he had that was like an additional bonus teaching. But the threefold thing that he does, that's Eliezer's thing, right? The rest of it, though, the bonus one, the extra piece, is an interesting one because that he's telling you that being around the wise is very important. You need to warm yourself by it, but you also have to remember that there's a power to it, right? It's a risky game to be around people who are wise because they can be it can be hard. And he's telling people it can be hard because if you enter into that kind of world, you're opening yourselves up to, being ridiculed or being made fun of or feeling stupid. But it's good to be there. It's worth it to be there. But also know that there's a cost for it, and that there is a if not a dark side, there's a dangerous side to it. And that's that it can be a scary situation being around people that are that smart. And it is not something to he's not saying avoid it. He's on the contrary. He's saying you should, but it's going to happen. And he doesn't really say, you can avoid it, beware of it. But in to some extent, what he's saying, be cautioned. It's going to happen. And just understand that that's part of the trade-off of being around the Chachamim. Being around those people is It's tough because the people are smart and they're going to expose your lack of knowledge. They're going to expose your ignorance. They're going to challenge you on the things that you say. And their words can hurt. They will, because they're smart and they know what to say. They know what they can say that can hurt you. So be aware of it. He doesn't say it's good that it happens. He doesn't say that's the good behavior, but that's what you do. He's saying, be aware of it, be aware of it, and be aware of it. So it is an interesting thing to think about. And for people who've, and I've been around, environments like that, where it's you definitely have to think 2 or 3 times before you say anything, because you know that they're going to look at you like, what are you, stupid? And they'll make you look stupid, and they'll make you feel stupid. If they are so inclined, if they're motivated to do it. So you better be careful. So there's that understanding that this is what happens. But again, Eliezer seems to be, careful and also, again, trying to be a good person, be a nice person. Let the honor of your friend be as dear as your own, like this isn't good behavior to hurt people, but, don't be provoked to anger. He says that, but obviously he knew what he was talking about from being around the Chachamim, being around the wise people. So it is daunting to be around people of that. So that's Rabbi Eliezer's. Now we get to Rabbi Joshua. What did he say?
You know, it's one day before your death.
Oh, that's why he said, Rabbi Hillel said earlier, repent as it's one day before your death. And since you never know when that day could be today, you repent every day. You have to be constantly having the knowledge that this could be your last day. So you have to repent. But he's of course saying, don't say you can't repent. You can. You can do it even the day before. Rabbi Joshua said, an evil eye, the evil inclination and hatred for humankind puts a person out of this world. Now that's interesting because, he's not talking about the world to come necessarily. It says the olam, the world, but maybe he is talking about the world to come. We don't know, but he says that ayin hara. Ayin hara is the evil eye, right? That is, we usually say that's like, like a curse, like an eye that's cursing something, but it's also, we also understand it as a jealous eye, or, an eye that's looking at something with jealousy and with wanting it, with coveting it, ayin hara. We don't want the evil eye, right? That's why we have amulets that protect us from an evil eye. That's why we say the words Kanahora, right? Kanahora means no evil eye, no evil eye. That's what Kanahora means. So when somebody would say something good, you would then say Kanahora, right? It wasn't like you said something bad. You say, my son just graduated from college. Now you wouldn't say that necessarily but you expected that. But we just had a beautiful new grandchild, Kanahora. No evil eye, because what you just did was you encouraged the evil eye by bragging. So if you brag, you're asking for the evil eye. You don't want the evil eye. So look, you shouldn't be an evil eye, right? You shouldn't be doing that. And the Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination, that's the part of us that is always a part of us, but it's the part of us that we have to control. We can't have the evil inclination being in charge of us. And then, of course, hatred for other people. What's interesting about this is it doesn't say hatred of Jews. It says hatred of people, hatred of humanity, right? It's not hatred of your fellow Jew that gets you into trouble. It's hatred of humanity, right? And this is what takes us out of this world. Motza'in, that takes us out, takes a person out of this world. Those are the things. He gives 3 things. Remember, it's supposed to be like threes. This is the threes. Rabbi Yossi said, let the property of your fellow be as precious as your own, which is very much like what Rabbi Eliezer said, to let the honor of your friend be as your own. But he says, let the property of your fellow be as precious as your own. Make yourself fit to study Torah, for it will not be yours by inheritance. And let all your actions be for the sake of the name of heaven. Let your actions be for the sake of heaven. Well, actually, all of your actions be for the sake of heaven. But so his threefold stuff, one of them is making sure that you treat other people's property like it's your own. That doesn't mean it's yours. It actually means it's chaviv. It's as dear. It's as dear to you as if it was yours. It's not yours. You're not entitled to it, but you treat it as if their stuff. Think about it as if it was your stuff and you lost it. So if somebody comes to you and tells you that they lost a lot of money or whatever, they lost a horse or whatever, you feel sad for them. You don't go, good, I'm glad he doesn't have that. No, it should affect you like it was you. It's your stuff. Understand compassion and understand empathy. And don't look at it like, I'm glad he doesn't have that anymore. No, it should hurt you. And then again, this idea that you somehow, are going to have Torah. Nope. It's not yours by inheritance. It doesn't come to you because your dad knew it. It's not your Yerusha, which is the Hebrew word for inheritance. Your Yerusha is what you inherit from your family. It's not inherited. You have to you have to do it. You have to do it yourself. Yourself, atzmecha. You're on your own, you do it. Mo Torah. So it's not your inheritance. It's something you have to work out. And again, keep making your actions for the sake of heaven. This is something really important, again, is that our actions reflect this sense of the fact that we are working as God's partners, which we read about before when Shimon ben Gamliel said, make your will God's will, and God will make his will your will his will. So this is the idea of letting your actions be for the sake of heaven. Let them be for a higher purpose. Great way to translate that and to understand it. That our actions are for a higher purpose, not for our own ego, not for our own success, but for a higher purpose. Rabbi Shimon said, be careful with the reading of the Shema in the prayer, which is the Amidah. And when you pray, do not make your prayer something automatic, but a plea for compassion before God. For it is said, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, and renouncing punishment. And be not wicked in your own esteem. Now, again, his lines are, be diligent, be careful in saying the Shema and the Tefillah and the Amidah. And then when you pray, to make sure that your prayer is not just rote prayer, which is very interesting because it tells us that already by this period of time, even before the temple or as the temple was being destroyed, people were already doing their prayers. Temple was already there. He's saying it like it's a foregone conclusion that you're doing the Shema and the Amidah. He's not saying, hey, there's a Shema and Amidah that you're supposed to do, by the way. He's telling you you're doing it, and when you're doing it, make sure it's not rote, which implies that it's already rote for some people, which means they've been doing it for a while. So it tells us that prayer was well on its way before even the temple was destroyed, which we know, but this is proof. This is some of the proof that we have of it.
Well, we already had, right? So.
Yes, some had been exiled, but Rabbi Shimon assumedly lives in the land of Israel. He's telling people, make sure your prayers are not just words that you're reading off the book or the ones that you just remembered in your head and you're just regurgitating them. They should be actually something that is a plea before God, a rachamim, right? A plea of mercy. And tachnunim, that they're supplications, compassion. So and the words that are used here are also not God, but Hamakom Baruch Hu, to the place, to God, the Holy One, blessed is he. So, and then he quotes the book of Joel, the prophet Joel that we're coming up to soon. He's actually the next prophet. After we finish Hosea, we get to the prophet Joel. Joel doesn't get quoted a lot. It's not like Joel is like running around. First of all, it's a short book. It's 4 chapters. It's not a long book. But what's interesting about it is that there is this line, which is actually a quote from Exodus, but he quotes it and says, well, it's a little different in the book of Joel, but Hanun Varachum, Erech Apayim, but he quotes it from Joel. And because it ends with the last part, again, and be not wicked in your own esteem. Well, wait,
Say something like that on your report.
yes, we do. We say that line that we quote from Exodus. We quote it from Exodus. Yeah, it's the Exodus version. But again, this saying, it seems like his threefold saying is: be careful with the reading of Shema and the Amidah. When you pray, don't make it about just rote. And then this third one, be not wicked in your own esteem, is a weird one because it actually seems to go against what the rabbis usually are saying, which is don't be too confident in yourself, right? Don't be certain to yourself, as Hillel had said, until the day you die. He's actually saying, okay, fine, I get that, right? Don't be overconfident. Don't be full of yourself. But he actually says, don't think of yourself as wicked. Be not wicked in your own esteem, which is essentially, again, don't think of yourself as a rasha, as a wicked person. This is something that's really hard for people because one of the things that human beings deal with, in addition to sometimes being overconfident and being blind to our faults, sometimes we cannot get out of thinking that we're bad people. And he just said, that's not, look, you could be wicked, but generally speaking, somebody who's going to have this kind of behavior, they're not going to be reflective about it. He's actually saying, for those of you that are walking around thinking that you're wicked, you're not. The people he's talking to, a wicked person's probably not going to be reading this or studying it or thinking about it. He's talking to most of the people who are studying with him and talking about most of the people in the world who are not wicked. They're not wicked people. There are very few people who are like inherently wicked. We do bad things. There's people who do really bad things. But to be wicked, a wicked person, is very, very rare. And he's basically saying, you're not that person. You're not a person who's irredeemably wicked. And I think it's a really kind of powerfully insightful saying, because it's basically telling someone you're not broken. You might have something that needs to be repaired, but you're not broken beyond repair. You're not faulty in your wiring beyond being able to fix it. And that's really important because, again, everybody needs a tune-up. Everybody needs to have a little tweak or so. Every day we can use a little tweak, but we're not wicked. And that's what he just told people. It's a really important thing that I'm sure, Joyce, you've had to talk to people before who are languishing in a cycle of their own feeling of being wicked.
Yes, I have. And it's very difficult to combat
Yeah.
because the little negative voice keeps trying to overpower the positive.
Yeah. It's very, very hard. It's almost one of the hardest things I've ever seen in talking with people who have this feeling about their own self-worth and their own goodness. I mean, it's almost impossible, I find, to get someone out of this.
It is
A lot of people.
possible, if you work with all of their senses, have them see it, sense it, um, hear it, play it and have it sounded back to them and write it and draw pictures of it. So if you get to all their senses and have them reinforce it, it can be done.
Yeah. But it's really hard, isn't it?
Yes, it is very difficult. Very difficult, but possible. And that's the good thing.
Yeah. And it's definitely good that people can get out of it, but yeah. It's very
It's
sad.
building a new wall of self-esteem, a new foundation, and then they have to keep building on it.
Yeah.
And I teach them how.
Yeah, it's a real tough one.
Yes.
So
Rabbi?
yes, yes.
Are you not reading into the last sentence? And be not wicked in your own esteem. You mentioned, right? Don't be full of yourself. I'm starting to see the word humility.
Yeah, well,
Humble.
yeah, but that's what we've read. This is not the opposite, but this is the cautionary on top of it, which is at the same time as you shouldn't be full of yourself, don't think of yourself as wicked. So this is don't think of yourself as wicked. Don't think of yourself as wicked. And again, this is you telling yourself this, repeating this to yourself that you're wicked. That's what he's saying. Don't do that. Don't do that. So again, up until this time, most of the rabbis' lines that deal with our self-esteem have been, hey, take it down a notch, right? You're not here to brag. You're not here to talk about your Torah. You're not here to be so sure of yourself, right? Don't be so sure until the day you die. But this one is kind of the other side. Don't go to this extreme. Don't think of yourself as being wicked. Don't think of yourself as being wicked. So the last one of his students is Rabbi Elazar, who we've already heard. He's pretty good. He's a good one. But this is what it says, though. Well, again, I don't know if this is necessarily better than any of the other things that were said, but Rabbi Elazar said, be diligent in the study of Torah and know how to answer an epichorus, and know before whom you toil, and know that your employer is faithful, for he will repay you for the reward of your labor. The Hebrew is a little different, but it's close. Now, know who you work for, which is he, right? Is God, the capital H, because you will be paid for the reward of your labor, which of course oftentimes means in the world to come. But what he's talking about here is be diligent in the study of Torah, right? You got to make sure you're continuing to study Torah, make sure that that's a priority. That's what he says right off the bat, and know how to answer an epichorus. So that seems to be part of that. That's the part of that same first line. So let's talk about it, right? So here it is right here. It's epichorus. That's a transliteration. An epichorus is a Greek word. We know that. Now, here's what we don't know. Here's what we're not sure of. And I will show you some of the commentaries on it. So if we look at, that's translated here as one who denigrates the Torah. That's a possibility. Rambam says, no, that doesn't talk about that one. Wait, maybe it says it below it. Yeah, here it is. He said that you need to study things which you can respond to the epichorus from the Gentiles and disagree with them and answer them if they challenge you. It says in the Talmud and Sanhedrin, they only taught about the Gentile epichorus, but what with the Jewish epichorus, if you answer him, all the more so he will rebel. So what are they talking about? Who is this epichorus? So it's definitely some type of philosophy or approach to Torah. which seems to imply, by the way, that if you know how to answer the Epicurus, then you at least understand where they're coming from. So let's explain it. So look, Epicurus is definitely connected in some way to Epicureanism. Epicureanism, but that's where the word is. We don't know that it actually only refers to Epicureanism. Now, by the way, when we talk about an Epicurean today, what do you think of? What if I say that something's Epicurean? What do you think? Give me some. What do you hear when you hear the word Epicurean? Anybody? Anybody?
I hear food.
Yeah, we hear food, right? We hear food,
Yes.
right? That's what we would normally say. It's Epicurean delight, right? It's an Epicure. It's a very fancy way of saying we're going to have some fancy food. But here's the interesting thing about Epicurus, and we're not sure that this is only what he's talking about, but Epicurus was actually a guy. He was a Greek philosopher, and his philosophy, his Epicureanism, we usually think of as being connected to food, but his philosophy, his approach to knowledge was to attain as well as to help others attain happy, tranquil lives characterized by a concept called ataraxia, which is peace and freedom from fear, and aponia, the absence of pain. He advocated that people were best to pursue a philosophy by living a self-sufficient life surrounded by friends. He taught that the root of all human neuroses is death denial and the tendency for human beings to assume that death will be horrific and painful, which he claimed causes unnecessary anxiety, selfish, self-protective behaviors, and hypocrisy. According to Epicurus, death is the end of both the body and the soul, and therefore should not be feared. Epicurus taught that although the gods exist, they have no involvement in human affairs. He taught that people should act ethically because, again, not because gods punish or reward them for their actions, but because due to the power of guilt, immoral behavior would inevitably lead to remorse weighing on their consciousness, and as a result, they would be prevented from attaining ataraxia. Now, most of us would say today that does not make sense. What also it seems is, where's about the food? What's going on with the food part? And the reason is that he wanted people to be happy. And so when we think about the things that make us happy, those are things like food and other things that make us happy. But the reality, of course, is that he wasn't really advocating. Like Epicurus was not like a guy who said, go out and get a fancy meal. He actually wanted people to live a self-sufficient life and not think about these kind of things. But what we do know, as we just read, is Epicurus also denied afterlife. And this was something that if people follow that Greek philosophy, and again, there's a wonder, look, some people could say that what he's talking about here, Rabbi Elazar, is he's talking about Jews that are Epicurean, or is he talking about Gentiles that are Epicurean? He's probably talking about Jews, right? He's probably talking about other Jews who said, hey, there is no afterlife. We just have to concentrate on this world. And this is, we like Epicurus and we like his philosophy. There's another theory with it. It's like all kinds of Greek philosophy, Stoicism and Platonic philosophy and all the other kinds of Greek philosophies. So some people say he's not picking on Epicurus. He's talking about all kinds of Greek philosophies, and that you better know how to answer those things. Which, of course, by the way, implies that the rabbis better know what they're talking about. And they better not just know the Torah, they better know how to respond to those challenges, which is a really interesting one, because it basically tells the rabbis, you better know what's going on in the world. You better know how to respond, because he says, know how to answer them, know how to answer those challenges. When they come at you with those kinds of questions, have an answer, have a response, right? Now, of course, he also says, know before who you really is, know before whom you're, who's the boss, right? Now, Epicurus did not deny that there was a God. He actually said there are gods, but they don't care about us. But the Jews also did not believe that. And on the contrary, Rabbi Elazar says, absolutely not. We know who we work for. We know that this God cares, and that God is actually going to reward us. And some of that reward, of course, is going to be in the world to come. That the reward for your labor is coming. It may not come in this world, but it comes in the next world. And so this philosophy, or this approach of, again, whatever they're going to hit you with in the Greek philosophy, and some of it was there are no gods. I mean, those type of atheistic or the gods don't care or the gods don't exist was part of that's why Socrates got in trouble, you know? So that stuff floated around, and the Jews definitely by this point are in contact with it. They know about it, and they better know how to respond to it. And so that's what's so interesting about that Rabbi Elazar. So that's the end of Rabbi Yochanan's students, and it's the end of their teachings, of their threefold. But I just want to finish with this because this is one of the most famous lines in all of Pirke Avot. It's a great way to end today, and it's a great way to never forget what Rabbi Tarfon said. Rabbi Tarfon said, "The day is short, the work is plentiful, and the laborers are indolent. The reward is great, and the master of the house is insistent." That's God. And we don't have a lot of time. The day is short doesn't mean, hey, it's 9 o'clock, it's time to go to bed. It means our lives, our time here is short. And we've got a lot of stuff to do. And as he finally said, he used to say, it's not your duty to finish the work. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. You don't have to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. If you study much Torah, you shall be given much reward. Faithful is your employer to pay you the reward of your labor. And know that the grant of reward unto the righteous is in the time to come. It's still in the future. And he basically says, again, it doesn't literally say haolam haba, it says la'atid laba, the future to come, the age to come. Maybe there's a time to come. Maybe it's not in the world to come, but there's definitely a time when the righteous will be able to have a world that is their due. So this is what Rabbi Tarfon said. He lived during that time. He also has a very Greek name, Trifo or Trifo, or Tarfon is a very Greek styling name. There's actually a early text from the church that is a discussion, is a debate between early Christian priest and a rabbi that's name is Rabbi Trifo. Some people say it's the same guy, Rabbi Tarfon. We don't know for sure, but it's roughly around the same time. But his very famous phrase, it's not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it, reminds us that we're not going to finish the work. We're not going to. Somebody else is going to finish it for us. But that doesn't mean that we can walk away from it and say, I can't do anything about it. You got to do your part and know that eventually, again, people will finish the work that we do. If it's the right work, if it's for the sake of heaven, it's going to get done. So
Planting a tree.
Yes.
That fruit that you will not eat.
you will not eat. The story that we read
Next generation will.
of Rabbi Honi, the circle maker, right? We talked about it at Tu B'Shvat every year. That there is a guy who plants a tree and it takes 70 years for that tree to bear fruit. But there were trees when I came into this world, and I plant for the next generation. But yes, it's not our duty to finish, but we're not allowed to neglect it either and say, it's too much, can't do it. I can't finish it. All right, folks, get to work. The day is short. Thanks, everybody, for being.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks for
Thank you,
everybody for
Thank you so
being here.
much.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Good to see you all.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Hi,
See you later.
Joyce.
See you Friday night, if not before, or somewhere.
Thank you.
We start Krav Maga tomorrow night too, so we'll see you there. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.